All right, we're back with the Impact of Educational Leadership talk show. We have as our host Isaiah Brown III and Professor Jeff Willie. Now, Professor Jeff Willie is an executive director with John Maxwell team specializing in personal growth and leadership development. Professor Willie is an educational consultant, conflict resolution trainer, mediator, with over 30 years in conflict mediation, and a former facilitator of the Franklin Covey 7 Habits of Effective People. Professor Willie currently travels presenting high-level church, school leadership, and personal growth workshops throughout the United States and throughout parts of West Africa. Professor Jeff is married to his high school sweetheart, Pat, and they've been married for over 42 years. They have 2 beautiful daughters and 1 grandson. Our special guest tonight, I'm so privileged to have him here with us, Mr. David King. Mr. David King, he is the son of a retired Dallas Independent School District teacher and principal and attorney who worked for the Department of Education. He is a product of Dallas ISD schools and a husband and father of children who have both graduated from and are currently attending Dallas ISD schools. Mr. King is a real estate professional, community organizer, nonprofit service provider, and a public official who believes in civic engagement to provide better opportunity in the community and improve the quality of life for underserved or marginalized children and families. David has served on several boards and commissions, including the City of Dallas Bond Task Force, the Dallas County Behavioral Health Housing Work Group, and the Dallas Mayor's Homelessness Commission. He is currently a member of the Oak Cliff Leadership Council and the African American Leadership Institute, where he chairs as community developer. Mr. King is a fighter. He's a winner. And when it comes to education, he coaches and oversees competitions for the Urban Debate League. Ladies and gentlemen, I have with me here Mr. David King and Professor Jeff Willie. Please say hello to the people, guys.
Hello, it's good to be with you.
It's good to be. Thank you, Dr. Drone, and good to be with you, Mr. King. It's certainly hearing all your accolades. I feel like I'm on the wrong line. I need to sign out and go to the back of the line.
No, I was about to say the same about you, sir. It's a pleasure to be in the company of such excellent gentlemen. There's an old African proverb: you want to be great, you associate with great people. So I feel a little greater this evening.
Well, that's why we connected to this gentleman by the name of Isaiah Drone. He is a people connector.
That's right.
He's a people builder. And he is definitely a positive influence on a lot of folks in this community. And what he's doing right now, I give him a lot of credit because he is reaching out, stepping out, taking what I call necessary risks to bridge the gap to bring our community and our education community together. So I still give a lot of attributes and highlights to Isaiah Drone for doing this. And so I commend you, Dr. Drone. Thank you, sir, for your leadership.
That's definitely. I just want to say, Dr. Drone, an immense pleasure for me being able to meet you. And I have to say, the more that I've been able to understand and learn, every time I pay attention to you, I'm finding out something new, something else that you are doing and working on. So your commitment and your thinking along these lines and the connections that the gaps that you're bridging, I think are critical. So it's just a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, sir. I totally agree.
Well, gentlemen, I'm so grateful as always to be in the presence of greatness as well. And with that being said, tonight we have a touchy subject. This subject is going to ruffle some feathers, but we're going to delve into it anyway. Tonight we will be discussing school choice. Now, some people believe that school choice means giving parents the power and opportunity to choose the school their child will attend, and this could then mean that the quality of a student's education should not be dictated by their zip code. A variety of school choice options exist today, including tuition vouchers, private scholarship programs, and charter schools, which provide an alternative to the quote-unquote cookie-cutter district school model. On average, nationally speaking, students in the 17th percentile are charter schools, and they perform significantly better, is what some people are saying, than if they had attended their neighborhood traditional public schools. However, there are states with caps whose charter schools are more effective than charter schools in states without caps. Now, what does this all mean? The legislative agenda to increase the transparency and the efficiency of charter schools has been a major discussion as it relates to commitment to support our public schools. First question is for Professor Jeff Willey. Professor Willey, describe to us educational leadership and the way that it affects students learning based on his or her learning environment.
Your preface to this was talking about the essence of the school choice charter schools, and you gave some statistics and some numbers to kind of help bridge that academic achievement gap from public schools and charter schools and the environment that students are exposed to in charter school versus the cookie-cutter neighborhood traditional public school, which in turn giving the parents a choice. And your question to me is dealing with the educational leadership aspect of that and based on the learning environments. I'm going to come from a lot of the, and Dr. Drone, you know, I spent a lot of time reading about these particular topics, and based on the questions, certain things come up, and I always ask myself, why am I reading about these particular topics? Because, and I know why, these topics are true to my heart based on my background dealing with education, public education, charter education, institutions of higher learning. They are very, very important to me. And I'm going to come from a book tonight by David King, Brother King. You might know this, and Brother Drone, you might know this gentleman as well, by the name of Clifton T. Talbert. And he focused on the 8 habits of the heart for educators. And I give you those 8 habits, and then I'll talk about some of the things that educators look for from the leaders to establish their communities, and what educators look for each other to establish that community. Because for that student to be served, that community has to be served. Those educators have to be served. Those educational leaders have to be served. There's got to be a collective mindset from the community that every key component has to be served well. Obviously, we talked about the servant leadership aspect. You got to be serving folks. And so I know last week I mentioned the fact that if you don't feed the teachers, they will eat the kids. And that's coming from a book by Guide to Success from Administrators and Teachers. It talks about that. It talks about those educators, those leaders basically taking care of those educators. And those 8 habits, I'm just going to mention 8 habits, but I'm going to focus on building a community. The 8 habits, and these are very common. Nurturing attitude. Every child can learn. Holding a student responsible. Dependable. Friendship. Brotherhood. High expectations. Courage. And hope. You would think those 8 habits of the heart would be prevalent in our education system. That's not always the case, because we have some educators that don't even care for children, but yet they're educators. And so if they don't care for children and care for people in general, it's hard for them to practice, apply, and permeate their community on these 8 habits: nurturing attitude, responsibility, dependability, friendship, brotherhood or sisterhood, that's kind of inclusive, high expectations, courage, and hope. The key essence of education is giving a young man, a woman, a child hope. And this is what educators, unselfish acts of educators This is what they want from their leadership. Now, listen to some of these right quick, and I'll try, and plus, Dr. Drone, you know what you do with me. You know how to say, well, let's move on, because I get excited about these particular topics, and they are significantly important to me. Is that unselfish acts that educators want from their leaders. Enforce the rules fairly. We build a community. We're talking building community, because that community has to be in place for those students to be educated, and everyone has to be on one accord. That's the focus, on one accord. It's got to be that way, and then enforce those rules fairly. Step into my classroom and visit more often. That doesn't happen quite often. Ask staff members about their families. Build those relationships. Get to know me about my family. What is my favorite color? What is my favorite food? Am I married? Do I have a boyfriend or girlfriend? What are my aspirations? Model what you expect of others. Don't just list your expectations. Walk what you talk. Visit each building at least once a week to encourage. Now, you say building, that's the school superintendent. You are visiting those schools once a week to encourage those teachers. No matter how old you get, who you are, if you're a human being, if you are breathing, you need encouragement. That's the only thing you need to know. No matter how well I'm doing on my job, no matter how well you think I'm doing on my job, if I'm breathing, I still need encouragement. And you would think this would be easy. Saying good morning, being polite. How are you? Give advice or ask to give advice. Don't just give advice. Don't judge my work unless you see my work. And listen and listen and listen and value my opinion honestly. Don't make an assumptions about my opinion. Don't judge my opinion. Value my opinion honestly. And then offer the positive feedback. Every area of improvement and every area of opportunity deserve that positive feedback. You establish a culture of risk-taking, and that risk-taking, there are going to be some mistakes made, but there's a room for improvement, and it has to be encouraged. Corrective behavior is positive behavior, and that educator wants that leader to establish that community based on that level of positivity. And that's the focus. Listen, eat lunch, treat each other, communicate, say good morning, take time to get to know each other, always tell the truth, trust each other, integrity, be transparent. You establishing a community. For me as an educator, I'm putting myself into the classroom now to be able to communicate with my teachers, because as a leader, you are serving me and you are meeting my needs. And it's a domino effect. It will roll downhill. I will treat my students differently based on how I'm treated. I cannot give unless I'm receiving. I cannot give what I don't have. It has to be focused. So the essence of what you're asking, Dr. Drone, is that learning environment is based on that community. That hope is every student can learn very, very high. And that student is getting that hope from that teacher. That teacher is getting that hope from that leader. That leader and that leader is getting the hope from the community that's been established, whether it be a charter school or whether it be a public school. You got to have that sense of hope. You got to have that sense of community. You got to have that sense of fairness. And you really, really got to focus on listening and entrusting those educators to do their job well. Trust them. And I think that's part of it. That's not the whole piece of it. You got to hold those teachers accountable as well. And they need to hold each other accountable. That's the focus.
Powerful.
So that's my view. Yes.
Powerful, or should I say impactful, impact of educational leadership. That's what the impact of educational leadership is all about. When executive leadership continues to put themselves in the classroom, and this is the model that you so eloquently spoke of. This is the model that we should expect as teachers and principals and support staff. This is the model. Would you please repeat the book by Clifton Tarbert again?
Yeah. I want that to get out there. This is a phenomenal book, and I came across this book when I was teaching in Florida. I was teaching high school junior ROTC in mid-Florida around the Tampa area, and one of my church members knew I was an educator, and she gave me this book as a gift. It's by Clifton L. Talbot, Taulbert, 8 Habits of the Heart for Educators. I tell you what, it is a phenomenal read for educators to understand the 8 habits of the heart, 8 habits of the hearts for teachers, and 8 habits of the heart for educational leaders. Those things are significantly important. You would think these 8 habits would be present on the campus: a nurturing attitude, sense of responsibility, dependability, friendship, brotherhood, high expectation, courage, and hope. Those things must be on display every day in that community, in that campus, from those educational leaders, from those executive educational leaders, and that is transferable to those students on a daily basis. They leave.
That brings me to my next question. My next question. I'm glad you said that, because now, Mr. King, I'm going to ask you this next question, because Professor Willie was talking about building the community and having the community basically communicate on one accord, and this creates a culture. It creates a language. And now I like the way, Professor, that you broke it down, and you took a superintendent and you put them all the way down. I know we're dealing with higher numbers. Dallas SD, I think they have over 200 and some odd schools. So now you take this powerhouse superintendent, and then you put him all the way down, triculate him all the way down to one school. Each school has their own different culture based off of the environment, and I like how you use that as an example. Now, let's go more policy with Mr. King, because he really is focused and keen in policies. Now, the school districts in Texas, let's talk about Texas. They have approved the tuition rate of about, I think, $5,250 per each child from K to 12 grade. And so this is why student attendance is so important. It's about funding. Without funding, there can be no effective school environment or school practices, right? Mr. King, what is the difference between charter schools and other public schools?
Well, one thing I'll say, one primary difference I would say when you're talking about charter schools versus the traditional public school system is that to a certain degree, a large degree, it implements a taxation without representation format from a policy position, I would say from a governance position. When you look at a public school system, of course, you have elected officials that are providing governance. And those elected officials, of course, are answerable to their constituents, to their voters. They can be removed from office if voters disapprove of them. With a charter school, you have a private board that does not have the same responsibilities to provide access, transparency, et cetera. And that, to me, presents a fundamental problem because it separates the real stakeholders from who become the decision makers. And it's still directing public dollars to these privately controlled boards. And that's what I mean about taxation without representation. We're paying our public tax dollars to charter schools who can privately decide how they want to provide an educational format in our communities. And the more they implement in our communities, the more of a drain they are against the public school system that does at least provide that actual representation. So that's one thing. That's one primary difference. Now, I will say a couple other differences, if you allow me. One thing is that charter schools pick and choose their children. There are several cases with charter schools turning away children with disabilities and special needs, as well as children who have some type of social issue that would be properly addressed by the comments that the professor just provided. instituting that social and emotional development for our children. So those, that's another primary difference for those charter schools. Instead of being in a situation where they need to contend with and provide planning and programming, not just for the best batch or the ones that get them, the highest scores, but for all of our children. To have a policy where you say, okay, well, we'll just send them back to their public school, as opposed to, being in a position to address with programming, with focus, with policy, those issues of all of the relative parts of your community. Again, that's what I say, goes back to the danger of that taxation without representation and providing the public school funding to these private institutions. Now, the other problem with that is the drain that it then creates on the public school system, because charter schools actually receive more dollars per student than public schools do in Texas. And, that represents a loss of about $882 million a year to the public school system. And just as we said, we don't have the funding to implement the necessary programming, to pay for increased counseling staff so that we can increase our provision of social and emotional development and learning, to increase our pay and make fairer systems for our teachers. The reality is just that you can't do it. So the drain that it creates on the public school system is what's actually destabilizing the system. I'll give you a perfect example in the city of Dallas. We have been become heavily penalized under the recapture system, under the system, because we're a property-rich city. However, the majority of the population in the district are poor. We know, Dallas is one of the top cities in the nation for childhood poverty and for racial and economic, or a lack of racial and economic inclusion. So this is the environment that we're dealing with. So while we have a city that is rich in property, we have a district that is filled with children that need more, that are coming from those communities where you don't crystallize that support because they have been marginalized by the historic discriminations we all understand. And so we have to address that. We have to be smart enough to know that when you imbalance a situation, if you want to correct it, you have to bring that balance back, and that balance equals equity in terms of how we provide education. And that's also a policy issue and one where you can hold a public school system accountable to it based on its public representation, but you can't do it with the private board. So those are some of the primary differences that I would say are there between charter schools and the public school system. The public school system is a system that we have that takes all of our children. And we who are coming from communities that have been marginalized understand how important that is. When we well remember situations where, we were refused from that same access. So we have to ensure that we're moving in the positive direction in terms of improving access, improving inclusion, improving equity, and there's just no accountability and no transparency, and there's no guarantee that it could be done through the charter school format, even if you were to say, well, hey, try to put them on an equal plateau, which they're not. I could go on with the differences there. I guess what I will say, two things that actually came to mind. I do want to say, listening to the professor's wisdom, two things came to mind in listening to him. One is an ancient saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. The other is the saying that we all, any of us who are familiar with African culture know very well, it takes a village to raise a child. And the importance of these two things as a lens for the development of policy. When we talk, the phrase that takes it when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, is an establishment of a sacred relationship between student and teacher. And for us, it's for us to determine how important do we identify that relationship as being. Because that's the quintessential, the primary relationship that engenders education in the first place and the last place.
Powerful. Mr. King, I know you can go on and on, but those
I know because
you and Professor Willie, Lord have mercy. But those were some powerful highlights. You talked about charter schools and how they don't accept all students. Mm-hmm. And this means they may exclude any student from enrollment who has a history of any disciplinary problems.
That's right.
Even just being sent to the principal's office. I know we have a lot of children that get sent to the principal's office for whatever reason. And he also mentioned that charter schools enroll, you didn't put a number on it, but I kind of did some research to be ready for you because I know you're a wealth of information. But I also have heard that charter schools enroll 6% of all students but receive only 1/6 of all state funds. And then you also mentioned that district public schools outperform charter schools on the state STAR test.
That's
now,
right.
STAR is the test that we have here in Texas. It's in math, science, and social studies for last 3 years that they use to do, score comparison. And, this is going to be a little touchy here. I've heard through research and through word of mouth that this is also where they base the prison population, and also, unfortunately, is where they base how many prisons they will have to build based off of these tests, like the STAR test. And also, you mentioned the dropout rate for charter schools is more than 3 times higher than that of the dropout rate for district public schools. With that being said, Professor Willie. Well, Professor Willie, do you have anything to say?
Oh, man, yes, sir. May I please, let me. As a matter of fact, Dr. Brown, I'll segue right into my question that's going to go right into that without you going right into it. I'll probably segue right into it. But let me just follow up with Mr. King. Sir, you have really set the tone and set for some very, very more impactful discussions because I'm certainly going to allow you to buy me dinner now. Coffee won't do. It just won't. Because we got to have some time. Yeah,
that's right.
Dig in. To break this down. And so a lot of things, let me just kind of share some things of what he said. And then one thing he said that I am a product of not having access. I grew up in a segregated environment, and I went to segregated schools. Didn't have access to the best schools. So it was when I say segregated, I'm talking until the 7th grade is the first time I went to an integrated school. And so my environment that I grew up. So I'm kind of dating myself there a little bit. And so I was subjected to that. And obviously a lot of my older siblings, I'm number 10 out of 12, so my older siblings were subjected to even more that they never got a chance to go to the integrated or the better schools or the better, what I call public schools, the public school. And so I'm an advocate of that public school system. And why? You know why? Because the inclusiveness of that public school system, all those aspects we talked that Dr. and Mr. King talked about, taxation without representation, where that public school has an opportunity to be able to take all commerce and be able to develop that social emotional learning for that student. And sometimes that charter school can deny that student. And that student would never have access to that social emotional learning unless they was in that public school environment. And improving that inclusion and also that level of transparency. The word inclusion is significantly important to me because of that. And so it goes into your question, what you said, Dr. Drone, in regards to, you kind of touched bases, but I would like to have another discussion on this in regards to the Department of Education and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And when you talk about those last scores and those reading scores, and that reading comprehension and math scores in the fourth grade, through the Department of Education, and now don't quote me on this, I would love to get to it and pull out my resources. I'm just kind of paraphrasing tonight, but I would certainly want to be able to get more into the research and to the white papers and the documents of when we are looking at the Federal Bureau of Prisons are looking at those math scores and those reading comprehension scores of students in the 4th grade, and that gives them a determination there's been a lack of educational impact at the home. There's been a lack of relationships in that school in those formidable years, and those scores are the gauges to that 14-year-old, 15-year-old dropping out of school and being part of the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
Let me say something here, because let's not go too far off the beaten path here,
right,
because that's a totally different topic that's impactful.
Right.
But let's kind of go. Let me kind of draw you guys back, and let's talk about public schools. That was Professor Willie. That was brilliant. Let's talk about public schools and how they rely heavily on this data that you're talking about. They rely heavy on the data collection through research of public information, surveys, and interviews.
What Dr. King said was the key component. What Mr. King said was the key component. At the beginning, the relationship, and at the end, the relationship.
Yes.
That is the key component of education. I don't learn from someone I don't like. I emotionally shut down. That is the key component. It goes back to that nurturing attitude, that friendship, that brotherhood, that courage, that caring. I don't learn from someone that I don't like. I can't help but not emphasize that the most. And I'm so thankful that Mr. King touched on that at the end and at the beginning. Yeah, that is absolutely significant and important. I know as a student when my teacher, educator don't like me. And when my educator don't like me, I don't learn. That doesn't mean that I'm not capable of learning, but once I get in an environment where I am nurtured, I am cared for, I am inspired, I am encouraged, someone is affirming me, my level of my academic achievement rises exponentially. If you want to reduce the academic achievement gap, and I got the 2 million minutes, what a high school student is in school, about 2 million minutes is a documentary came out about in 2007. You can go online and Google it. You can get the PDF that talks about 2 million minutes. They compare different aspects of the Asian kids, the kids in Europe, and they compare it to kids in the United States doing all the extracurricular activities. And you look at the kids in China and the Middle East and India, and they spend more time primarily focused on key components of academics. That doesn't mean that they are smarter or more academically gifted than they are. They have time on what I call time on task. Time on task and a nurturing environment. And if we can get our public school system to focus in on that, that's why I'm a big proponent of what Mr. King is referring to is this public school system, is that we got to build a community and build those relationships, and so we can have our students time on task. Now, if you travel abroad, you don't see too many students, especially in Japan or in China, that are spending time playing football or playing basketball or baseball or band. They got different things that they do, but those extracurricular activities are social emotional skills that we have embedded into our culture, and they consume that amount of time. Go ahead.
That brings me to my next question, and I just want to say, let me just park the car right here. I wish I had some sound effects, maybe later. But let me park the car right here and just say how grateful I am for your passion, and also for your rich resource. And I think one of the ways, in listening to what you were saying, one of the ways that we can help as a community is to do more interviews and have more meetings with community members. And that could be local businesses, that could be district personnel, it could be even campus staff, but definitely we got to get parents and potential partners and sponsors to get involved as well. Let me ask you this question, Professor Jeff Willie. Charter schools are public schools of choice, meaning that families choose them for their children. They operate with freedom from some of the regulations that are imposed upon district schools. Is this best, and I think you already covered it, but and I'm pretty sure you did cover it, but just lightly cover it, put a little sprinkler on top. And I will get this next question to Mr. King.
But and Mr. King gonna come in. He gonna put the little top, and I'm gonna put the sprinkles, and he's gonna put the little the frosting on it. But I tell you what,
But is this the best thing for our community, charter schools, or is public schools the best thing for our community?
Now, that's a very tough discussion, question to answer. It goes into some policies. It goes into funding. What's best? What's better? What's great? What's the greatest? That is a very, very broad question to answer. And so, if I have to advocate for a system to increase its focus, I'm going to advocate for the P, the public, not the C. That would be my primary focus, and I give you my reasons for that because of my history as not having access to some of the best public schools. And of course, growing up in the 60s and the early 70s, charter schools was not prominent, not very prevalent. And of course, me being in a very rural community, what's going to happen? That was not going to happen. But if I had to say that best is kind of a very elusive. And so I can't really say best and define best. It's difficult. It's too elusive. But I can say it this way, that we need to make sure that we target, and as you stated, Dr. Drone, those community leaders, those parents, they have a voice, and we have to learn to advocate and bring up parents into the discussion. And sometimes, even when they don't, we have to find an encouraging way and stop making these statements where they're never coming up here anyway, so we're going to make the decisions without them. We as educators and executive leaders got to find a way to connect that gap, bridge that gap, in spite of those social, emotional, economic challenges that exist around the corner. We got to find a way to knock on that door and say, Grandma, Can I sit down on your couch and discuss some of these issues that's going on with your grandson and granddaughter, mama, guardian, whatever it needs to be? I know that's a very, very difficult. We're talking about a very, very difficult, challenging district. Dallas ISD is a challenging district. Houston ISD, all these very, very large urban school districts are extremely challenging. Even though Dallas ISD, dollar-based wise, but is still dealing with a lot of children that's impoverished, social, economically, academically, and we have to find a way to bridge that gap. Do I have the answer? No, but I'm willing to ask the question to get the answer.
Wow, that was more than sprinkles there, sir. That was some chunks. You put some chunks in there. Listen, Mr. King. So, all those student demographics, mm-hmm. They cannot be changed. You can't. It's not your fault where you're born. The
right.
zip code you're
right.
born in, right? But as educators, okay, and as researchers and people that's passionate about education, we have to recognize the trends and the data, right? So they could be useful for developing intervention programs or personal growth mm-hmm. programs. Right. To find solutions to these problems that we keep trying to address. Mr. King, how can we save our public school system?
Well, I tell you, I definitely believe, and it kind of goes back to one of the professor's earlier points. This is a village solution situation. And what I mean by that is we have to build inclusion and consensus amongst the real stakeholders. I'm involved with a lot of projects and commissions and planning and whatnot, and you always talk about stakeholders, making sure the stakeholders are there. And it's amazing how every single time it seems like, the stakeholders are not the ones that are impacted by the decisions being made. They may profit from it, but their lives are not directly impacted by it. And, so it kind of brings up the reality when you think about it. So why do things keep progressing in a direction that is counterproductive to the growth of people who don't have an empowered voice? And the question is the answer, because they're not the ones making the decisions. So, how do you change that? You change the decision makers. And, the power of the seemingly powerless is really found within the unification of their numbers behind a common interest. And when that occurs, there is no force in existence that can stand against it. I don't care how much money you throw against it, how many tools, how much infrastructure. It cannot be defeated. The will of the people cannot be defeated. Now that's just a little bit over a monumental task, because we're not a monolith, and even more so, we're all focused on different levels of survival that prevent us a lot of times from focusing on growth. But what I will say is, if we're going to save the public school system, the first thing that we're going to have to do is to make people aware of the truth. It's a saying that I came to realize even more so over the last few months how true it is, that the lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth gets up and puts its pants on. It's much more difficult to explain and debate the truth than it is a lie. It's much easier to reduce a lie to a tagline that can be repeated over and over and over again than it is to be honest with people and explain the circumstances and adjust to the realities of change and how decision-making must change based upon the changing environment. So the first step is to arm our people with information, with knowledge, with awareness of the realities that impact them. So that, when they're deciding, when they're making these decisions about, well, should we, start public schools or charter schools, they can make that informed decision. I'll give you an example. I got the wonderful, I think the best thing about the process of campaigning was the opportunity. It was unexpected for me, but it was the opportunity to speak to so many people about so many relative issues and to really get a much broader understanding of what people go through, the things that they have in common in terms of the difficulties and the differences in their culture. And, one thing I can honestly say is, we all want very much the same thing. It's just our understanding that's different. The perspective that's different. It's our awareness that's different. And in the same vein that you change a child's behavior by exposing them to realities that they haven't been exposed to before, we could change the behavior of members in our community with the same process. Now, the second, and that I would say, so information, education, awareness, shining the light in the dark corners, breaking down those walls that they hide their meetings behind. One thing that I've seen that's interesting on the board is the process of the rolling quorum, the process of the closed meeting, the process of connecting, important critical issues to attorneys' advisement so that they can hide it. When if you want to write an information act to receive the information, they can hide it from you if they can connect it with an attorney's advice. I can tell you that for a fact because it happened with my own request for information. So that's part of the process as well, is educating our people on the facts. At the same time, shining a light on those dark corners, where transparency is kind of dying. Once that occurs, then I think it becomes clear that a system that ensures all children can learn, that provides representation and access to the people who are actually impacted by those decisions is a better system, incentivizes a better process than one that allows for private control of public dollars and can prevent, create blocks against community access. And, instead of being in a position where they are forced to and incentivized to program for all, they can be incentivized simply to refuse some so that they can, get their cream of the crop and get their paycheck. Once that information is out there, I think the groundwork is laid to begin to build a consensus. And that consensus is going to have to result in pressure on the decision makers at this time. I go to or listen to every single DISD board meeting because I want to be informed. I do the same with city council. And, one thing that I'm aware of is, firstly, the fact that when some of the most crucial decisions are being made that are going to impact huge numbers of children, nobody's there. They're able to make those decisions pretty quietly. And then, the reaction only comes once the policy is in place and it's been funded and it's been implemented, and now well, how did this happen? So that's one reason why I'm so big on changing that trajectory, bringing the community into being informed about what's really going on, what the process really is. And then building that consensus that I tell you, one thing I know I'm going on, so just stop me, Dr. Jones, if you need to. But I work as hard as I can to think holistically. And it's something that, is a process, But I think, a critical one that needs to take root as, the core of decision making when we come to things like this. In any society, when you ignore any segment of that society, you create a cancer that will eventually kill the whole body. And that is such a strong history for America, one that it needs to recognize the importance of rectifying, because it breeds its own destruction if unresolved. That fight, that battle, I think, can majorly be won within the realm of education. That's where you're going to change. We talk about tolerance and political correctness, but legitimately embracing our children, bringing them together, building that consensus, building that community, providing that social emotional support that the professor was talking about, and bringing children together across those socioeconomic and ethnic lines, to be properly educated with real information. That's what will change that next generation and eventually root out these negativities that are preventing these disparities. And that, I think, can best be done through the public education system. So our fight to save the public education system will, in turn, truly engender a saving of our communities and the growth of our society as far as the civil nature.
Wow. That brings me to my next question. First off, that was ingenious what you said, and it sounded like a debate. It sounded like a speech. I just want to cap on a few points that I heard that kind of rung out to me, resonated with me. You got to recognize, you have to have recognition for students doing well. You also, you got to bring the school to the people. You got to bring it from the outside in, so people know that it's there. We are here, and we want to pull on, our local fire department, the police station, restaurants, you name it. But then we want to update the roster of students that's in programs, that's in these, intervention programs, these personal growth programs. We want to make sure that these rosters are updated. That was so brilliant. Listen, guys, we're out of time. However, please give us a takeaway before we get out of here. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. I appreciate it. David King, Mr. King, sir, it was absolutely an honor to listen to your editorial tonight. It was absolutely educational. I am for better enriched listening to what you have to say. I appreciate the informative dialogue, and I appreciate the education. You educated me on some things tonight that I am going to be looking at too. That's why after we get off this line, I want Dr. Drone to give me your contact information, because I do want you to buy me dinner. But I tell you what, we'll go 50-50.
Done.
I love it.
I do want to be able to tap into your knowledge, your experience, and things that you have contact with, exposure with, relationship with, to educate me on more things that I need to be educated on. I think there's a lot that I can learn and garner just being in the same room with you, because I certainly garnered a lot just by listening to you tonight. So I have been forever enriched because of your presence on this call with me tonight. So I am grateful, thankful, and very humbled to be part of this conversation tonight. Thank you, Mr. King.
Wow.
Well,
Mr. King, you're next. Yeah.
Well, Professor, I'll say first, you took the words right out of my mouth. No, seriously, I consider it such an honor to be part of the conversation with people who have such a wealth of knowledge, and more so than that, but just a wisdom and a desire to do what's right for the greater good. I think that's so critical for us in these days and age, and I think that those of us who have that motivation, that desire, a lot of times we think we're spinning wheels in the dark alone, when in truth, we are out here. We need to connect with each other. We need to network. We need to build. That is, as much of an answer to the problems that we have as anything else, is just the coming together of people of like mind, like heart, who believe in doing what's right for all, for the greater good. So I'm honored to be a part of this conversation with you gentlemen, and it's so obvious from the passion and the knowledge base from which you speak about this thing, how seriously you take it, how much you need to be listened to about it. So I'm definitely gonna buy you that dinner. Let's get that contact information. Let's make this happen, Dr. Drone, to facilitate these conversations. To promote that understanding, even the understanding of the importance of the impact of educational leadership and how it changes things. That's bringing that awareness that we were talking about that's so critical. You are already doing that work. So, like I say, I'm honored to be amongst both of you, and I just look forward to any opportunity that we have in the future, and we create those opportunities. So to move forward, an agenda that's going to benefit all of our children, and grow our community and move our society forward in terms of its stability. That can't be overstated.
Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you again tonight. You've been listening to Professor Jeff Willie and David King. I am also your host, Isaiah Drone III. Good night.